Welcome to the One Stories podcast. Today you get to hear my one story. But before I share that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and what I do and kind of where I've been. So I'm Wendy Babcock. I'm an international and TEDx speaker, author, and the paid stage speaking coach. I'm also an award-winning lyricist. So I do share in my one story a little bit about how I became a speaker, so I won't bore you with those details here, but I do want to share a little bit about how I've been kind of all over the place. I always like to tell people I have a rabid squirrel brain full of ideas. I also have I am a neurodivergent and I have some elements of ADHD. And so I think that explains a lot about why I've been all over the place. So back in around, I think 2010, I became a beach body coach. So many of you know that they just recently had a whole debacle where they went from the MLM to the affiliate model. But anyways, I was in the MLM from about 2010 to roughly 2016. And then I went on to a few other MLM companies like I think Visalis, is that what it's called? Visalis. And the ketone company, I can't think of the name of it now. And you're probably screaming it right now at me. But so I sold the ketone things and what else did I do? I ran a ballroom in the city where I lived. And I've just kind of been all over the place. And once I got into speaking, I started to kind of sort through all of that and stop doing a lot of those random things. I was also teaching a kickboxing class that I had made up called Rebel Warrior because I really enjoyed like music type of like dancey sort of kickboxing classes. So I created my own routine and started teaching it locally. It was just a way to keep myself um, working out, I guess. I figured if I had to teach it, I had to show up. If I don't teach it, sometimes I don't show up. You can ask my jazzercise instructor. I go like once a week. Um, so I ended up once I quit my full-time job and I got into speaking full time, I had to like let some of those things go and learn to focus a little bit more. But then like the pandemic hit and I had to shift again because a lot of my speaking gigs just kind of went to the wayside. They canceled events or they went virtual. And I'll be honest, I just did not care for the virtual speaking because you can't really see the audience. They're not really engaged. They have their cameras off, they're on their phones. You just don't pay as much attention as when you're in the actual space. So I just was not a fan of virtual speaking. And since everything was going virtual, networking and all these different events, I started thinking about, well, how can I make networking especially more engaging? And so I came up with this idea that stemmed from something that happened in junior high. So if you're a Gen X, maybe you've heard of this. Remember the slam books back in the day? Essentially what it was a spiral notebook, and you would put questions in there like, who's your crush? Who's your best friend? What's your favorite song? I don't know, just stupid questions, right? In the front of the book, everybody would pick like a number. Like you'd put number 7 and then you'd answer all the questions as number 7. So it was kind of anonymous, even though, like, let's be honest, we all knew each other's handwriting. But anyways, they became banned because people would take those to the extreme and they would start bullying people, and anyways, my best friend and I got in big trouble for having a slam book. But I got thinking about that whole idea of the slam book. And I thought, what if I created random questions that people had to answer, right? So, and also a way to record all your networking. And I created this journal called Slam Networking. And it was about having this journal that you could put all of your contacts and everyone you're networking with. But then it had random, like icebreaker type questions because I tend to get to know people better when I'm having fun with them. And it helps you kind of when you're having fun with people, you're not thinking about being super professional or putting on this business-like facade, right? And so I thought, well, if I could just ask people these off-the-wall questions, you hear ones like, I'm trying to think of one that they use commonly, like, tell us something you're grateful for. And I'm telling you, when those are fine, it's great, but people are going to position it to lead into their business, right? It just comes natural. But if you ask them some like crazy off the wall question where they don't have time to think about how they can connect it or make themselves look more professional, I'd ask questions like, actually, most people enjoyed this one the most. All right, you're in a grocery store. You have 3 items to put on the conveyor belt. that are going to make the cashier blush. What are they? And you'll see quickly whose mind goes to the gutter first. so, so I came up with this whole networking business called it Slam Networking. We played bingo and Wheel of Fortune, and we had these dance parties and just crazy things, and people seemed to like it. But what happened was when things started to open up, end of 2021 into 22, actually, no, it was even sooner than that. It was probably closer to the earlier part of 2021. I was kind of getting burnt out of networking. So I realized quickly that it wasn't quote unquote my thing, right? I wanted to get back on stages and I wanted to speak, but I also wanted to do more than that. I wanted to not just speak on the complaint free message because that's Will Bowen's topic, and you'll hear a little bit about that in my one story up next. But I wanted to create something that was my own, and I had hired a marketing coach back then, especially around the Slam networking to market it properly. And I told her, I said, look, I think I want to start coaching, but I don't know what I can coach on. I don't really want to coach on networking because I'm not an expert in that. And so she asked me a really pivotal question. She said, okay, well, what do people ask you? What do people come to you for advice around? And I was like, oh, well, that's easy. People ask me how to get paid to speak. And a light bulb went out. And she's like, great. She said, how much are you charging for that? And I was like, nothing. And the look on her face was like, are you kidding me? I'm like, no, people reach out. They're like, hey, how do you get paid speaking gigs? And then I would just ramble off everything they had to do, like fire hose style at them. And she's like, you need to be charging for that. And so that was how my coaching business got started. And of course, I started speaking about speaking and getting paid to speak. So that's how that title came about. But in the process of that, taking on clients, and I've had some really, really wonderful clients. And what I've learned between working with potential clients and my own clients is it always comes down to the storytelling. It's great to have to aspire to be on the paid stages, but the paid stages are more about motivational speaking and educational speaking. So there's different types of stages. There's, speaking to sell, which means you're a coach, an entrepreneur who has something to sell to the audience, right? And so that's formatted a bit differently. That talk is formatted in a way where you're going to like pitch something at the end. Even if it's a free offer, a free download, you're still going to format it the same way. You want people to opt into whatever it is at the end of the talk. So that's formatted totally differently than a motivational keynote. Um, and with keynoting in that sense, you have to have a lot of storytelling to demonstrate whatever it is you're teaching because people will learn it easier and they're going to remember it because they have a story tied to it. So what I learned was when I was taking speakers who are doing the speak to sell method and I was trying to teach them how to become a keynote speaker, the storytelling is really where they struggled. And I started to realize like I was asking people to jump to make a big leap from speaking, either not speaking on stage or someone who has some speaking experience but speaking to sell, to now not only get on that paid stage, which is a leap, right? There's a shift in mindset that goes into paid stage speaking. But I had to take a step back. It had to be about, okay, I would get the question all the time. They're like, well, I have a story to tell, and I have something to teach, but I just don't know how to put those things together. I don't know how to find more stories to put into my talks. So I realized I had to take a step back. Instead of just jumping to the paid stages, I'm like, okay, we need to learn storytelling. People have got to learn how to teach something, but then use a story to demonstrate what they're teaching. Um, so that's what I've come to specialize in now. So this brings us to how One Stories was born, right? This is how you're on this platform, whether you're listening to it on the podcast or you've seen the YouTube premieres, or maybe you're thinking about getting on the stage yourself. So again, while I'm teaching or while I'm coaching my clients and we're working around story, they have these incredible stories. I'm telling you, the people I've met really have led some interesting lives, right? Some traumatic, some, are tragedies, some are just inspiring and motivational. But also, when you're a speaker, right, you need visibility. And so a lot of the speakers I work with, they want to get on a TEDx. A TEDx is great. I've done one myself. I like to say I'm the exception, not the rule, because I didn't use a speaking coach or like a TEDx type of coach. I just started applying And I got it on my second time applying to get a TEDx. Honestly, it was the right topic. It was what matched their theme. It was just kind of all the stars aligned. So I don't teach how to get a TEDx because I lucked out, honestly. But I started asking, okay, well, why do you want to get a TEDx? Is it about the idea we're sharing? Because that's what TEDx is about. TEDx is not about promotion. They don't want you to utilize it to promote yourself. They really want you to use it for the ideas worth sharing. And that's what it should be about. That's what their platform is. But what I come to find is people want it because of the visibility. There's something to be said about when I share that I've done a TEDx, people are like, oh, right, there's more fascination involved in it. And so I thought, okay, I think we need to create something a little different. We need a stage for stories that's like a TEDx where it creates visibility. And so that's how When Stories was born. And when is because in business, we talk about the why a lot, right? If you're an entrepreneur or a small business owner, people ask you all the time, what's your why, right? And your why leads to, why are you doing this? What's the reason and what's going to keep you going, right? Do you want to leave a legacy? Is it about building something you're proud of? Is it something you want to hand down to your kids? Whatever it is, right? It's your why. But I started asking people, well, when? When did you decide this is what you wanted to do? When did your life change? And so that's how the when question came in, is when did everything change for you? And that can be, we have lots of those moments in life when everything changed. It could be personal, business. It could be when you quit your corporate job to go into, becoming an entrepreneur, and it's not easy. So I want people to take this to a personal level because what happens is people start out on the surface, right? Like, oh, when everything changed, I quit my corporate business and I went and became an entrepreneur, which is great. But like, I want to hear like the deep, dark parts of that, like what actually happened, right? Because sometimes we only want to share like the surface level stories. When stories is about going to those deeper places and telling the true stories, the real authentic parts of yourself. It's vulnerable and it's kind of scary to tell. And I have to share with you the story that you're going to hear for me, my one story, is not the one story that I wrote originally. So this is kind of ironic. So When Stories, let me just give you a quick what I built this to be is When Stories is this live, beautiful stage. When you see the videos, you'll see them. It's a live event on a beautiful stage, but it's also a book anthology. We pull the audio from the talk and we put it into a book anthology, so you don't have to even write a word. We transcribe it. You can add to that, of course, and then we have a professional editor so that it's very readable. And then we also do put it on this podcast, right? So it's these visibility pieces that the speakers and entrepreneurs are really looking for. It's also 6 weeks of coaching before you get on stage. So I walk you through in group coaching for 6 weeks. We meet twice a week to build your talk so that it's really impactful and it really helps you shine, right? So in the coaching, I teach everybody, right? So originally you have to start with, so what? Why do people care? You have to answer that question. Well, here's why. And by the end of the talk, I want them to ask themselves, what now? Because the point of One Stories is not just to inspire and share your story. It's also like, where are you at now? Let's showcase your business, showcase what you do without being icky promotional, right? We're not selling. And so I take them through that process of telling their personal story to where they're at now. Now, in saying that, as I was writing my own one story, I was going to talk about how I have the BRCA2 gene mutation, and in 2016, I went through a bilateral mastectomy with deep flap reconstruction, and it was a 12-hour surgery, and I went through some stuff, right? It didn't really even recognize myself anymore because I had all these just crazy scars. I just looked like, it felt like from the neck down, I was a different person. So I was going to share that story, and I had most of it written out. But then I got about 3/4 of the way through my talk and I hit a wall and I could not wrap the talk up the way I wanted to. I'm like, why am I struggling with this so much? And I finally had like about 2 weeks out from the live event, I had this kind of, I got hit with a 2x4. It was like, well, duh, I am not doing what I'm teaching all of these other speakers to do. Is okay, this is the journey you're on, and here's how it ties to your business. And I wasn't doing that. Sure, I mean, I could probably do like verbal gymnastics to make it work to lead into my coaching business, but really the two really weren't connected. Even though, yes, it's my story, it really wasn't connected. That story is not part of why I am a speaker. And so I had to have like kind of that hard conversation with myself about, shoot, that means I have to talk about the hard stuff. Ugh. I have to go there where I'm asking all of these speakers to go to those places of, you know, childhood trauma and, you know, the things that I've experienced. And that's the things that I usually don't want to share on stage. So I'm like, okay, let's do this. And so because those stories are what lead into me being on stage and why I do what I do. So without any further ado, I'm going to let you listen to the talk that I wrote in less than 2 weeks and got on my own stage and shared my one story. So here it is, up next.
When everything changed, I was standing in the living room of a single wide trailer without a stitch of furniture, except the two blow-up mattresses that my 7 and 10-year-old were sleeping on in the back room. It was silent in the house, and I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. But I could not shake this tornado of feelings that was going around inside of my body. It was anxiety and fear, but also a feeling I didn't recognize. See, I had just turned 31 years old, and this was the first time I'd ever lived on my own. And now I was a single mom. Over the next few days came a barrage of text messages just blowing up my phone, ranging from, "You're a fucking whore," to, "I want you back." And all I could think was, how the hell did I get here? How did I end up so consumed by fear? How did my life go so awry that I was in this position? What was going to happen the next week, the next month, the next years? I had no idea. Granted, I was no stranger to fear. I grew up with a stepfather who instilled so much fear in me that by age 5, I had an eating disorder. He was old school, right? So his idea was you didn't get up from the table until you ate everything on your plate. But the problem with that was he had a very unrealistic expectation of how much a 5-year-old should eat. So it would take me hours to eat a meal. So long, in fact, that a lot of times I'd get down from the table, go put on my footy pajamas, and have to come back and try and finish my meal. So many nights, this is what it looked like in our house. I grew up with a sister and 2 stepbrothers who would come on the weekends occasionally. Now, with 4 kids, you can imagine sometimes things would get a little rowdy and a little noisy, and we'd be having a good time until I would hear it. I would hear the jingle of a belt buckle from down the hall. All 4 kids would stop dead in our tracks because we knew if we woke him up from his Saturday afternoon nap, it was not going to end well for us. But fortunate for me, I was the youngest and the smallest. So by the time he got done beating the oldest 3 with his belt, he was pretty tired by the time he got to me. And to this day, the sound of a man's belt buckle jingling still makes me cringe. So for many reasons, I learned at a very young age to keep myself small, to be unseen, and to be quiet. I learned to be silent because silence kept me safe. Around age 11, I started to keeping a diary, and I wrote songs and poetry, not just as a way to escape, but also a way to be heard on paper. And now, I don't want to brag, but at 11 years old, my poetry and my songs were pretty deep. I had some pretty empowering influences, such as Air Supply and the Go-Go's. So you can only imagine. Now, my stepdad's verbal abuse was just as bad, if not worse, than the physical. And I think that's what stuck with me longest. He would say and call my sister unimaginable things that I can't even repeat. And my mom would make excuses for him. Oh, that's just how your father is. That's just how he shows love. Funny way to show love, right? When I was in high school, I had the honor of being named a Polish Day princess. Pretty impressive, I know. I know. Don't have to bow. Um, I went through the process of writing this long essay, going in front of a board, and telling them why I wanted to become a Polish Day princess. And the odd thing is this was not my personality through school. I was definitely more of a wallflower. I kept to myself. I had a couple, close girlfriends, but this was very much out of my wheelhouse to even do. And I didn't even tell my parents that I was trying out to do this. So imagine my surprise when I was one of the girls picked as a Polish Day princess. But man, was I excited the day of. I had borrowed this beautiful red dress from one of my really good friends, and I spent hours in my room doing my makeup and teasing my hair. Now, this was the early 90s, so I might have single-handedly taken out the ozone layer, okay? But I was excited. I felt so good about myself. And I walked out of my bedroom, and my stepfather said to me, "Nice dress, but what are you going to do with that face?" Just shook my head and rolled my eyes, so used to it at this point. And then he said, "Well, where the hell do you think you're going anyways?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Polish Day princess." And I explained I went through the whole process. I got to be in the parade. To that he said, "Well, how the hell do you think you're going to get uptown?" And I quick looked over at my mom, and he says, "Don't look at her. She's getting ready for work. She's not taking you anywhere." And my mom just kind of scoffed at him and said, "Bob, just take her uptown." And he said, "No, this is bullshit. She got herself into this. She can find her own ride uptown." And as they started to fight over this, I stood there with my brown paper bag of all of my clothes to change into after the parade. And I could feel my face getting hot and red and tears welling up under my eyes. And something just boiled over inside of me. And I whipped that garbage bag across the room and I screamed something like, "You're an asshole," at him and ran to my room. And I just started bawling. And about 10 minutes went by after I heard them fighting back and forth about what a pain in the ass I was. My door flung open. It was my mom. "Let's go." She was annoyed, but she took me. I wore my sunglasses for about the first half of the parade to hide my red, puffy eyes from crying. And about halfway through the parade, when I thought, okay, it's safe, no one's going to know I was crying, I took off my sunglasses and I smiled like nothing was wrong, and I elbow wrist my way through the rest of that parade just in time to get my photo taken. That was the first time I'd ever spoke up for myself. Now, I imagine it wouldn't be a huge shock to many of you to learn that when I was 16, my first serious boyfriend was 29 years old and drove a motorcycle. Talk about poster child for daddy issues, right? My parents owned a bar. I remember one afternoon coming in off of a motorcycle ride. I walked in behind the bar, to which my stepfather announced to the entire bar, it was full, "My daughter, the dirtbag." I was so embarrassed. But as always, right? I'm going to put that mask up and I'm going to shrug my shoulders and act like I'm in on the joke. After my stepdad passed away, I had a conversation with my mom about the abuse that my sister and I had endured. To which she said, "It never happened." She completely denied it. She said, "I don't remember that happening, so it couldn't have happened." So my experience, my story, didn't matter. So I quit talking about it. Now, remember Mr. Motorcycle Man? Yeah, when I was 18, I married him, and we had 2 daughters together. And guess how that went? It was basically a repeat of my childhood, only a little bit different. For such a long time, I was so uncomfortable saying that I experienced domestic abuse. Because, well, he never hit me. He didn't punch me. So how could I claim that I experienced domestic abuse? And I struggle with that. Because in my mind, all I experienced was complete control, manipulation, excessive jealousy, and gaslighting to the point that I actually thought I was crazy and losing touch with reality. And the physical part of it, besides the verbal parts, we'd get in these heated fights and one or both of us would throw and break things in the house. But the physical parts, again, he didn't hit me, right? But he would forcefully hold me down so I couldn't move, or he would slam me against walls in the house in fits of rage. I remember going to work one day and a girl noticing these bruises on my arm. She goes, "Why does it look like those are fingerprints?" It was from an argument where he had held me down so tight his handprints were embedded in my arm as bruises the next day. I lived in this constant state of fear and anxiety. I had this heightened sense of the energy in a room because of it. And if the energy was even a little bit off, I would start to shake uncontrollably because I didn't know what was about to happen, because usually that meant something bad was about to happen. But yet I didn't like to say that I experienced domestic abuse. Recently, I actually looked up the definition of domestic abuse. It's a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. Now, during all of these years, I still kept a journal and I wrote songs and poetry. I'd come up with these elaborate metaphors to put into my songs to, again, escape and to write out my story on paper. And I even got brave enough to enter some songwriting contests, and some of which I actually won. The very first lyric contest I ever won, I was so excited. I won $500 cash and a full production of my song. I was actually going to get to hear the words that I wrote on paper for the first time. And when that CD came in the mail, man, I was stoked. I called my then husband at work and I said, "It's here. I get to hear my song." And when he got home that night, he never brought it up. So I never played it for him. And you want to know the ironic part? The song was called "Don't Wait Up For Me." And it was about a woman who left an abusive relationship. And after 13 years of marriage, on May 26, 2006, I got to live out my own lyrics. And I walked out the door. As the years passed, I started to share my story and tell people what I had experienced. And what I got back were whispers of the people that had heard my story who said, "That never happened. What? He didn't abuse her. We didn't see it, so it couldn't have happened." So once again, my experience, my story, it didn't matter. So I quit talking about it. I did a lot of therapy after that. I did a lot of personal development to try to find who I was and figure out what path I would take in life. And that's when everything changed again. In January 2017, I came across this movement called A Complaint-Free World by a gentleman named Will Bowen. And it was about learning how to stop complaining. And again, I was trying to push the negativity out of my life, and I kept thinking, wow, what's more negative that we do than complain? So I was very intrigued, and I looked up the movement online, and I went to social media and looked up Will Bowen, the creator of this movement. And on that day, he posted, "Hey, I want to train 10 people to do what I do, to get on stage and share the complaint-free world message," because he was only one person. He'd already been on Oprah and People magazine and all kinds of news outlets, but he felt like he had just barely scratched the surface. Now, understand, I worked in a cubicle for 20 years. I never had any speaking experience. I never aspired to be a speaker or be on stage at all. But you know, sometimes when you get that nudge to do something new, this felt more like a 2x4 to the back of my head saying, you need to do it. And so I did. So I got to learn the art of public speaking, and I learned how to teach the complaint-free message to all kinds of organizations. And it was really cool because as I built my talk, I used the framework that Will told us of how to teach the complaint-free message. But the cool part for me was we got to incorporate our own stories. So for me, this was a lot like songwriting. I could find my own hook and how to really bring an audience into my talk and get them to lean in. So it was a very creative outlet for me. And the first few times I got on stage, whew, it was scary as hell. But it was also so exhilarating because that girl who was silent, who kept quiet for so long, was being seen and heard in a really big way. In 2019, I created a women's event, and I wanted to put other women on stage and give them a place to teach and tell their stories. And it was the first time I was going to share this very personal story of mine. And my talk was all about unchaining your inner warrior to shift from fear to focus. And man, I shared such a traumatizing experience on that stage, and I cried through the entire thing. But when I got off stage, a woman from the audience came to me in tears. And she said, that's what I needed to hear, because that's what she was experiencing. And that was the moment I knew that my experience and my story mattered. During the pandemic, I started taking on coaching clients, entrepreneurs who also wanted to get on stage and get paid to speak. And that was my favorite part, is hearing their stories and their experiencing and finding their hook so that they could make sure that their story and their experiences mattered and they could make the impact that they really wanted to make. So storytelling became a huge passion of mine. And I realized that speaking and songwriting had a lot in common. It was all about telling the stories. And I didn't even have that realization until probably 6 months ago when I was like, oh, that makes so much sense why I love songwriting and why I love speaking, because it's all about stories. Because stories are what connect us as humans. Think about your favorite movies, music, books. We see ourselves inside of the stories. We see a piece of ourselves. We relate to one another. And in times when the world feels like it's about to implode on itself, and we can actually sit down and share our personal stories, that's what builds bridges to help us understand each other. And when you can speak your story out loud, it frees the words from the piece of paper that they're written on. And I finally realized that I had taken the metaphorical pen out of my stepfather's, my mom's, and my ex-husband's hands, and I was writing my story out loud. And when I think back to that moment when everything changed, when I stood in that living room of that single wide trailer with no furniture, on my own for the first time and a single mom, feeling that tornado of feelings that I was feeling, the fear and the anxiety and that feeling that I didn't recognize, was freedom. Thank you. Whew. Thank you.